1:04 p.m. Calling this meeting to order. Attending are Commissioners Duncan, Brooks, and Filios. Do we have any changes to the agenda? Hearing none. Dena, our Finance Director, please.
Thank you, Commissioners. At our last budget deliberation, we did have some items that spilled over into this meeting. So with your permission, would you like to start with finishing up personnel, or would you like to do revenue first?
Do you have a preference?
I'd love to hear the revenue, because then it makes it easier to do the personnel.
Okay.
You okay?
If
Revenue first.
Okay. Great.
Okay.
All right. So then we'll start with a very brief presentation. All right. All right, bear with me. So in our prior discussions, there was a request to talk about just revenue in general, just to give a primer. So that's what this presentation is for. It's very brief, and it's also for the benefits of those watching at home. So I thought I'd start with a little levity. I think we all struggle with our government solutions. So just to start. So what I wanted to do, and I think, Chris, you may have seen a particular flavor of this presentation when you first started. I want to compare and contrast the private sector to the public sector, just to give some context. So any business, including our business, has expenses or expenditures that consist of people, operations, and capital needs. In a private business, if you sell, for example, mattresses, and you can't meet those expenditures, you could diversify your portfolio, and you could sell associated products to fill in those revenue gaps. You can make as many widgets as you want to cover your expenses, or you can cut your expenses because you're not necessarily mandated to provide certain products or services. You're an independent business. So contrast that with the public sector. Same basket of expenses, but you're very constrained in how much revenue you have to work with. This pie represents the major categories of revenues that are available to the county. The largest of which is property tax. Last year we were at 49% of the county's services, operations, capital was funded by property tax. The rest is either our savings account, a tiny bit for grants, revenue sharing from the state, fees and charges.
Okay.
And we know we're growing. So we know the demand for those services with our limited pie of resources is going to continue. We're going to continue to see pressures on our resources. And that's where you have the fun job of rationing those resources to their highest use. So just for some contrast and to give some context, you notice down at the bottom, Kootenai County, as of 2019, has the lowest levy rate of these 5 counties. We're trying really hard to keep our taxes low. If your property was valued at $300,000, this is what you would pay. So we're second behind Ada, and we're way behind everyone else. So this county tries very hard to keep taxes in check, and it's demonstrated here. Also keep in mind that last year, or in 2020, our current year, our levy rate was even lower than this. So as we grow, that levy rate goes down. And also, I will mention the F word briefly. The counties that show an asterisk took foregone that year as well.
In this current fiscal year 20?
For 2020, or for 2019.
Oh, 2019.
2019,
okay.
I wanted to have complete data, because we're not done with 2020 yet. We're always 1 year behind lag with our property tax collections.
That's correct.
So this slide has a lot of information on it. I will send this to you so you have it, but suffice to say, the The taxes that we get from the state have various sources, flavors. Sales tax is a big one. That's a big unknown for us in 2021. I have a feeling, and from what I've seen so far, our revenue shortage, our uncertainty is starting right now and will hit us in 2020 as well as 2021, probably more so in 2020 than 2021 because it's immediate. So to calculate what the county receives for sales tax, there are several iterations. So if you think about all the sales taxes collected in the state, all that goes to the state, all the counties collected, or all the businesses collected, that gets sent to the state. 11.5% of all the sales tax collected goes into a pool, and of that, 47.1% is sent to the counties. And of that, we get a small piece, and then we give the rest to the underlying districts, and there's a whole bunch of calculations underneath of that I won't go into. Needless to say, it's very complicated and not very straightforward, and big thanks to Joanne Connor for going through the statutes and trying to simplify this as much for me to wrap my head around it and make it understandable. Cigarette and tobacco tax, we get remitted quarterly. Also, the state tax and revenue sharing is quarterly, as well as liquor tax. The cigarette and tobacco tax, that money goes to juvenile probation services. Liquor tax goes to family court, drug court, mental health court, doesn't come to the general fund. Lottery, if somebody wins, we get a distribution of that. A lot of that goes to the schools, but we do get some of that, and then also goes to juveniles and juvenile services. PILT, payment in lieu of taxes. That is where you have federal land or land that taxes can't be collected on, so the state gives a little bit of money back because you have this land, but you can't tax it. There's no way to give property tax, so that's what PILT is all about. CEA taxes, another piece of the puzzle, has to do with cooperative electric associations and the amount of electrical lines that are in the county. There's a tax associated with that, so we get a distribution for that. So for last year, well, for our current year, these are the sources of funding and the proportions of that. And notice that grants is very small because we don't budget grants really. We wait until we actually receive them before we put them in the budget. But that represents personnel funded by grants, current personnel, so we have to pop that into the budget. As you can see, that 49%, the property tax at about 50 million. We used 8.9 million of fund balance last year mainly for capital projects. Our revenue sharing pool, about 14.2 million, and then those fees, charges, and interest. We'll also note the latest word is we will probably see a drop in some of our fees, especially with the state, with the vessel fund. And that will probably happen this season, probably not next season, because there was a new system implemented and it's not up and online yet. So people can't buy permits, therefore we're not getting the permit revenue. So this summer we may see a very light receipts for that. That money goes to pay for some people expenses, but it also goes to pay for grant matches. So next year, when we're in the process of doing our grants, we may see some needs pop up for grant matches that may be outside of those fee revenues and those restricted funds. So that's something to keep on your radar. So I also wanted to give this, we show this in our annual meeting when you do the budget hearing of how property taxes are calculated. The levy rate is a number, it's a ratio. We don't actually come up with a percentage and apply that percentage to properties. It's what our budget is. Our levy is budget driven. So you take your budget amount, you take your property amount, and that ratio is your levy rate. And as you can see, from the red line, our net market values continue to rise, so that ratio continues to go down. So the levy rate, if a person's property didn't increase in value year over year, they would see a reduction in their property taxes because we have a bigger pool of people paying into those property taxes. And then in addition to that, there are multiple agencies. So just because we collect all the property taxes doesn't mean we get to keep those property taxes. Those go to underlying districts, schools, cities, urban renewal, highway districts, libraries, et cetera. And we remit those every month to those agencies. So those underlying agencies depend on us to collect all the property tax and then remit that every month by statute. Again, not the happiest place to be, but I wanted to have this for informational purposes because there are a lot of questions surrounding what foregone taxes are and how they're calculated. And just a few words about Ada and Canyon County dipping into their foregone for certain capital projects in recent years. That's where they had to go. So luckily, we haven't had to go there, but just for information's sake. And then again, this is a review from last year's budget hearing. This is my boss's tax bill. So this shows just how much of the county is included in the tax bill and all of those other underlying districts, just to give some context there. And then I decided that a Venn diagram might be fun. So your particular tax bill is, everybody's different. Everybody's got a different tax bill. And so this particular tax bill, you can see for that tax bill, the larger proportions of that particular tax bill, depending upon what all of the districts are that straddle that particular piece of property. So every person's property tax bill is different based on where that property is located and what districts are there. And then very quickly about funds. Government deals in funds. We do fund accounting. So we have different kinds of funds. We have our government funds, general fund, that sort of thing. We have fiduciary funds, like our internal service funds for our medical insurance. Those are like trust funds that we keep to pay for specific things. Also, the tax that we collect and then remit out, those pass-throughs, those are trust funds, fiduciary funds, and then proprietary funds like our solid waste department. So this is our fund balance as of Q2 of this year. As you can see, solid waste drives the biggest piece of that. Our restricted fund balance, fairly small, but it's pretty equal across all. The unassigned fund balance at the bottom, that's our cushion, our 2-month cushion of personnel and ops that you ratified in April. And then the assigned fund balance, that's our extra savings account for capital projects or whatever you decide or deem is worthy to place in the budget. Committed fund balance, I will mention too, that was assigned fund balance that was committed for this year's budget. With a resolution, you can decommit that money and you can put it back in assigned, you can recommit it to something else. So that's also a movable amount of money besides the assigned fund balance. And we did update our fund balance policy to reflect that 2-month cushion, so that was official. And having a policy gives us guidelines. It gives us the security in knowing that we're covered if there are interruptions in revenue, like we're probably going to see, that we're covered. Our current fund balance reserve right now is $13.4 million, just officially for the record, that is our current fund balance. And that's our assigned fund balance. That's our reserve above and beyond.
And that's healthy?
Yes, it's healthier than it's been in a number of years, so good job. And that's all I had. So any questions on any of those concepts? I can send this to you. I didn't want to belabor it, but I did want to present this because I think it helps kind of give some background.
Yeah, excellent.
All right.
Can you take us back to the calculation of mill rate?
Sure.
I don't want to go too deep into this because it can cause a lot of confusion, but.
It's a confusing concept.
The math is clear. There you go. Okay, so for the benefit of everybody listening in, 101 point, that's our budget, the 101 million
Yes.
change in the numerator. The denominator is the total assessed value of the entire county.
Yes.
Where is that? Okay, so when we calculate the mill rate, we come up with that decimal, that fraction.
Yes.
We know that that's applied toward new growth, right? So if we have $438 million of new growth, we take last year's mill rate, we multiply it out, it gives us a figure. This year, I think it's about 1.2 mil.
Yes.
Where does that Okay, where does that calculation figure into an individual's tax bill?
So.
Go ahead.
Each individual's tax bill is going to be different.
Okay,
So we take, it's a complicated question. So if we were to look at, let's see,
maybe I should ask.
yeah, we'll look at Jim's tax bill.
Yeah, let's look at Jim's.
So in the first column, you can see that he has a homeowner's exemption, and then
Yes.
what's taxable. So it's about 50-50, because that's the limit. It's either 100,000 or 50-50. And then see those rates? So each individual rate for Kootenai County, all of those different funds, all of those have a different mill rate. The sum of those is that mill rate, that overall mill rate you saw on the previous screen.
Oh,
So the summation of all of the levy funds is that one levy rate. So depending upon where you're sitting, somebody else's bill may not have a particular urban renewal district or whatever in it, then it wouldn't have that piece of it. So if you summed all of those mill rates, you would get a completely different rate for each tax bill. But for the purposes of our levy sheet, we look at each taxable fund where levy money comes in, and then all of that is driven, that levy rate is driven by how much money is sitting in that. So, for example, is county fair in there? Okay, so county fair is in there. So that county fair rate is based on the $80,000 that was in the county fair's budget for 2020. So that's the rate that gets pulled in for there. So if you look at our levy sheet, you'll see those individual rates.
okay.
So not a great answer, but it's.
No, you're right, it's complex. So is it fair to say that the budget, the overall budget, in this case, this year, 101.6, does in fact figure into an individual's, let's say, county component?
Yes,
So they're not only affected by the 3%,
right.
but by the levy rate?
They
Or
are
by the budget as a
affected-
whole.
They're affected by the levy rate against their taxable value based on where they're sitting and their property value. So if our levy rate goes down and all things remain equal, like I said, their tax rate will go down. But as we know, most of our properties
Have gone
are
up
going up in
dramatically.
value. So even if the property tax value goes up and the levy rate goes down, we're still gonna see an increase in taxes for taxpayers, even if we take zero. If their value of property goes up, their tax bill's gonna go up. It won't go up to the same extent or degree, but it's still gonna go up, and it's gonna be based on where their property is. So if they're in an area that has a lot of underlying districts, or a big school district, or multiple URDs, they're gonna see a big tax bill because they have very high rate taxable areas.
Okay,
It's complex.
thank you.
You betcha. Any other questions? All right.
Excellent.
Okay, let's look
Thanks
at the
a lot.
revenue summary.
I'm glad everybody got it. I'm just looking around, okay.
Okay, so that's personnel here. Although it's very colorful.
You know, and actually, to your earlier point, Dena, it was very
Yeah.
interesting. When former Commissioner Bob Bingham was here, he developed a little program, and if you remember the 2 years that he and I went through this, the increase was 1.5%. And he actually showed that unless your property appreciated by a certain amount, and I believe it was somewhere around 8%, your county component would have dropped. County component of your property tax.
Sure, absolutely. Well, we've seen a steadily declining levy rate just because we're exploding with growth.
Right. So really, it's a question of levy rate versus rate of appreciation. And if one is moving faster than the other, that's going to be the weightier factor in the determination of that tax.
the big revenue summary. What I wanted to do was give you an idea of the trends that we're seeing for revenue right now, and revenue collections, and what we're anticipating. So right now, our groups have taken into consideration, based on their operations, what they think will be remitted for 2021, but it's still, it's a pretty gray area. And I know for a fact that our treasurer has mentioned that he's probably not gonna know until July what our investments are gonna look like. Am I saying that right, Steve?
Well, I guess the way I would phrase it is that, as we all know, the interest rate market is changing dramatically as we speak. And the rapid change is making it difficult to come up with an estimate of what the interest rate environment is going to be next year. So to give you kind of an idea of what's going on, you may understand that we are limited to investing only in U.S. treasuries and agencies, basically. Last year, the average rate we could earn on money was anywhere from 1.7 to 2%. If I were to take our money and redeploy it today in a 2-year treasury, I would get 0.2%, 20 basis points. So if you extrapolate that out to next year, our entire portfolio reprices, which it won't, the majority of it will.
Are you able, excuse me, Steve, are you able to pick Steve up?
We take 20 basis points multiplied by our average balance outstanding, and if we use that assumption, that's not even $250,000.
On an investment of how much?
110 million.
250,000 on 110 million.
Take 20 basis points multiplied by 110 million. Now that 110 million is the average outstanding month to month. We have fluctuations during tax collection, et cetera. There's a few other complexities that I will go into tonight, but the point I'm trying to make is the interest rate environment is changing rapidly. The Federal Reserve is meeting today and come out with a forecast. It's going to be interesting to see what they have to say, because back in March, they didn't even issue a forecast, because they didn't know what was going on. So, long story short, on the interest rate income that the county's going to earn this next year, I originally budgeted 1.2 million. I had a discussion with Leslie a couple months ago, and I said, don't count on that. I'm not going to give you another number until late in the summer, and things settle down. I told her at that time, don't be shocked if I cut it in half. So I still have not budgeted out the 1.2 million. In another month or so, we'll see how things settle down, and then at that point in time, I'll give you my best guess what's going to happen.
Are you talking mid-July, Steve?
Well, I'd like to put it off as late as possible as it relates to actually putting it in the budget, but you give me a date that you need an estimate on, and I will, at that point, give you my best guess.
Dena?
I believe, so Friday, July 17th, I believe, is when we want to have the budget balanced. So in that mid-July week would be the best for us, because then we could address it if we had to plug revenue in another spot for a loss of about 600,000, it sounds like.
If I could take this time maybe to explore a little bit too, because when I'm making this estimate of what the interest income is going to be, I have to make an estimate of what the general interest rate environment is going to be for that entire year. Then I have to estimate what my balances are going to be for the entire year. I can do a pretty good job of coming up with a guess. But I know that there have been conversations amongst the Board of County Commissioners about utilizing some fund balances to possibly pay for a building, things like that. So if there's any consensus among the board on how you intend to utilize the fund balances next year, that will impact one of the key components that I use to estimate what our interest return is going to be on those balances.
Because it impacts the principal? Okay.
Am I going to have an average of 110 million next year? Or am I going to have an average of 80?
Okay.
That kind of high level, if each one of you guys just want to give me your personal preference or ideas, I then can put it together and kind of come up with a guesstimate of what I think you guys are actually going to officially adopt next year. That would be helpful.
Okay, thank you. Go ahead, Dena.
Friday will be
Thanks,
our
Steve.
capital day. So normally, fund balance is employed for capital projects, so Friday would be the day that you would be taking assigned fund balance and applying it to projects, and then we'd see what was left. So we could have that as early as Friday, if you decide on all the capital on Friday.
Yeah, I think we probably have a good idea. Okay.
So this is kind of colorful, but I wanted to show you the biggest variable for us is going to be this intergovernmental sales tax, and then the fees, the revenue sharing, that kind of stuff. So what I did was I looked at what our current adopted budget is and what we've collected so far, and then figured out about how much we should have had collected at this point, and if we're over or under. And then I looked at those places where we were under. So this is color coded, this state voter registration fees. I've got that one marked. You can see that for 2020, that's how much was budgeted. For 2021, we have 620 budgeted. I don't know if that's going to be affected. It sounds more like this number will be affected and not next year, because their system would be up and running and we'd actually
Sure.
be collecting fees. But I wanted to highlight that one brightly. And then we look at state revenue sharing and sales tax as kind of a lagging indicator. So we're on track so far. So we don't know, we're under a little bit, but our latest month hasn't rolled in yet, but we're fairly on track. This payment in lieu of taxes, we should be getting that any day now. It's an annual disbursement, so we'll know about that very soon. In these cases, it looks like for the most part, these are being budgeted flat, or they're being budgeted slightly lower, just to give ourselves a little bit of conservatism in those. So the folks who budget for these particular line items, pretty much across the board, have taken a conservative, not a detrimental, but a conservative approach. So we could see higher receipts, but we don't want to get too overly optimistic. These other ones are fairly immaterial. I didn't go into great detail there. These two are on track and pending for payments, again, likely in July. So I'm not super concerned at this point, but the state revenue sharing is a lagging indicator. So what happens in the next few months will probably be our biggest dip. I would think by next year we should be getting back up to normal if, you know, another shoe doesn't drop. So those are the biggest drivers for our unknowns. This is a little bit messier, but a lot of these are really small. These are fees that we collect for services. And I know you had something about district court collecting.
Right, because they're trying to implement a new collection system, but because of everything that's holding the courts back and the pushback from Idaho Supreme Court, not able to get up to speed with what we need to have done here, it's just delaying the project even more. So
Okay.
There's some delay, and as you are well aware, there's just no activity at the courts right now to bring revenue in.
So we're not seeing any huge fluctuations in those. They're fairly small. They're not huge drivers. There's some other special assessments and things in here. We weren't seeing anything that was real material here. It's a fairly small area, like CEA taxes. It's a once-a-year distribution. It's on our electric lines, probably not a high-risk item. Same thing with, I'm not sure on the 3% yield taxes. Steve, do you have any comment on that? Okay. So, and again, you can see in prior years, it's a fairly small amount of money. So we're trying to focus on the big things, basically. So any questions on that? Does that make sense?
Yeah, can you take us back? Yeah, there you go. If I look at state revenue sharing, second line,
Yep,
and we're talking fiscal '21,
yep,
okay, so fiscal '21 begins in October.
right.
Barring a resurgence of the virus and any measures being taken by the state, wouldn't we potentially be experiencing an increase over fiscal '20? The biggest impact's going to be this fiscal year. There shouldn't really be, I would almost anticipate an increase in fiscal '21.
Except if people aren't spending.
Yeah, but, I mean, unless you want to assume that everybody's not going to be back to work.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if that's crystal ball talk, but I'm just saying that that would be a reason why we wouldn't see an increase just because people aren't spending like they were.
But why, okay, so if the economy's recovered, and I don't know that it's going to recover fully, but why wouldn't they be spending? I mean, at least in Idaho now, the governor's offering $1,500 for people to go back to work. I know, which saves the state money, otherwise they're going to spend $600 a week till the end of, what is it, end of July? In added or supplemental unemployment? Well, it's just a thought.
Okay.
Bill, do you have any?
Right now, frankly, it's all crystal ball talk, all of it.
We could keep an eye on it and see what happens, and about the time that Steve is looking
Yeah,
at his
that's true, too.
investments, we can look and see what starts coming in for the next couple of months, at least for another month or two, and we'd be able to see if things are rebounding and feel more comfortable.
Yeah, so to your earlier point, be conservative, that's fine.
Yeah, I mean, this one, the 300,000 difference, you know, we've been collecting more. I mean, we could bump it up a little bit, but if we wait until the last minute, then we'd have a better idea. You could get a comfort level on how much you really wanted to put yourself out there.
Okay?
But these revisions aren't huge in the general scheme of things. Things are looking pretty good, and we're pretty insulated in our area. People are moving here, our property
That's what I'm
values are going
thinking,
up.
yeah.
There's a lot of cities that don't have that luxury. So we're in a pretty good spot. So after looking at this and digging into this and talking to my tax pro and people in the office who have been doing this for a number of years, they're fairly optimistic, but they want to, you know, not be overly confident.
Okay.
All right?
So where does that take us?
So let's go to our revenue page. So this is the summary that I usually provide, and this is by org set. So this shows all of our non-property tax revenues by department, by org set. So you can see what's been collected to date, what the 3-year average is, and what people are projecting. And these are pretty conservative projections. So you can see, I mean, community development is pretty confident that they're gonna collect that. Here your 3-year average is 7.9, 7.7. I mean, that's pretty good. A lot of these where it says balance revenues to expenses, these are either grant funded or these are balancing funds. They're restricted funds that are balanced with fund balance anyway. So they're not gonna have any impact on the levy. Again, these were the ones that were kind of the ones that we're watching. The vessel fund, those boater fees. And then this is Steve's estimate for all the revenue associated with the treasurer. It's just in one lump that we'll revisit in July. So this one, I'm not sure, the sheriff may be able to speak to this one. For the school resource officer, I know that we had a contract last year that was based on the school year, that the school resource officer was gonna be partially supported by the school district. I have not heard back from them. Have you heard anything from them since April?
You're smiling, I don't know if
Well,
that's good or
no,
bad.
but, COVID has kind of cut off communications, and we certainly put that officer to good use, putting him back on the streets, and then, and like I said on Monday, that break on that was a 70-30, and that 30% comes out of the vessel account, which is now working Marine, so that, we're making good use of those officers' time, but I have not had any conversation with the school district, and, that Cooney School District is a little more difficult to get a hold of,
Okay.
so.
Well, if you want, we
But I anticipate that we'll send, that we'll have this ongoing. I haven't heard nothing but rave reviews about the program and about the officer there. And I think they're very appreciative of the fact that they are so rural and that we have a deputy there in their school. So it's really been a plus for both of us.
Okay, good, thank
Do
you.
we anticipate any change in the rate at all, or do you think it'll be flat?
I think it'll probably be flat, though I haven't had that conversation. They've only had an acting superintendent this year. And so last year in August, their superintendent was terminated from her position, and they've only had an acting. So they've lacked a little direction and continuity there just for this year.
Thank you. All right, are we ready to go to personnel? Almost?
Almost there, almost there. So I think the only other one, I think we had the Hayden contract. I know that's kind of in process. Dan, did you want to speak to the Hayden contract at all, or have you heard anything from them?
Brett Wires here,
Brett, did you want to come forward?
Sorry, I didn't see you, Brett.
Brett Boyer is the city administrator for Hayden. Did I say that right?
Yeah,
Okay.
thank you. Hi, everyone.
How are you?
So we're working out our budget as well, and we appreciate the partnership, being able to have some dedicated deputies for the city of Hayden. We feel like it's working well. For our budget this year, our estimates on revenues, we're going to see a reduction based on sales tax and highway distribution funds of about $200,000. We did put in our budget the same amount that we currently have in the contract. I think there's one piece missing that we agreed to last year that we may want to add to the contract, and that was when we were talking about it, we were going to pay for half of a vehicle each year instead of trying to do one each year, and I don't think that's part of the number there.
No, because that wasn't originally budgeted, but we can add that in.
So I think it's like an additional $37,000 that we can add to that.
Okay,
And so
thank
we've
you.
budgeted that, and then I assume everybody, I didn't know if you discussed the governor's proposal on property tax reduction using, you were there, Chris.
Yes.
And so that may be something we need to talk about, because as we looked at that, we may be eligible to have that deduction, and you would as well, and so we want to make sure that we do that correctly. So anyways, we appreciate being able to partner with you. We'd like to continue that, and thank you.
Thank you, appreciate it.
Your folks have been awesome to work with as well.
It's good to hear.
Yeah. Matt Street was like one of our own. He'd come to our meetings and was very helpful, and so we appreciate that partnership.
And so do we. Thanks so much, Brett, appreciate it.
All right, so we can update that. Okay, so just to talk about the whole thing with the governor. on
Yeah,
Monday.
please, would you?
I am waiting to see what the guidance is of how we're supposed to calculate this. I don't really want to dig into the numbers until I understand what the scope of it is and how we're supposed to deliver it. It's my understanding, and correct me if I'm wrong, that we would be required to take 0% tax increase, but we could take new growth. And that's what we have factored in right now in our preliminary summary anyway. I think the devil's gonna be in the details and how we're going to administer this with the existing systems we have. In our COVID task force meeting today, a great idea was brought up for perhaps a contractor could come in with some kind of middleware solution that could extract data out of our current system and do something outside of the system to help us, but until we know more, we really can't plan for that. But any costs associated with administering that, it's COVID related, so we could charge that to COVID dollars to administer that. So that's something to think about too, if we have to, really get creative with how we are gonna administer this, because it's my understanding that our current systems don't support doing this kind of a activity. We can't distribute, on a taxpayer by taxpayer basis with our current systems the way they are. It takes some kind of technology.
So to make sure everyone has a common understanding of at least what we know thus far, the property tax relief applies to the property tax segment of our budget, correct? Which is the 49 million. It doesn't apply to the balance, that difference between the 49 and whatever it is, 103, 104, right? Because that's fees and grants.
Right.
So that's not limited. So we can bring in more revenue potentially in that segment. But it's the 49 mil, that's the number, that we're freezing. Is that a fair statement?
Yes.
So 0% increase on that 49 mil.
Yes.
Okay,
Great.
thank you.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, Steve, go ahead. Why don't you come up, it'd be easier, yeah.
Chris, you were there yesterday.
Yes.
I think you got your head around what's going on.
I hope
I
so.
don't think the other two were there. I'm just curious, since we're talking about revenue, do you have any initial thoughts individually on whether you're going to accept this proposal by the governor and opt in, thereby restricting your ability to increase the budget, property tax budget, by 3% and only limiting it to new growth? Bill, I don't know if you know much about the details of
I do. I'm certainly not ready to sit there for you today and commit to this or that. I'm sorry. This is not pin down bill day.
I'm not.
Okay,
trying to-
all right then. Refer your questions to somebody who might want to answer that question.
Do either one of you two commissioners want to answer that question?
Yeah, I'm aiming for a 0% tax increase, because I think our citizens need that extra benefit right now of this program. And I'm just concerned about the implementation of it. I hope that the cure isn't worse than the,
Right, precisely.
Do you have,
Likewise, yeah, I'm with Leslie on this, and I think, at least on a preliminary basis, and I really don't think, Steve, that we have much of a choice.
I don't think so either.
Yeah, and even considering the possibility that it might make it difficult for us as we approach fiscal '22, and I'm aware of that, but I really don't think we have a choice. I think we're going to have to go for it.
I agree. I couldn't get the sense when Mr. Boyer was up here whether the city of Hayden was in the same, would you mind addressing the
No,
question?
not at all. Brett, do you want to come up, please?
So it's still early on. The details will be coming out on the 12th, is what they said. And so when we read that, I think from our perspective, we want to see what the effect would be on new construction for the following year. Ours is a very small portion when you look at, around 300,000. But any amount, reduction for property tax for our citizens will be interesting for our mayor and council. So we will look at it. I don't have a full answer, but that's.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, Steve. Dena?
So, moving on. Here's our preliminary summary. So since we're talking about property tax, that's 49 you mentioned, that's 0%. We've also added in an estimate from the assessor of new growth, adjusted a little bit to not be too overly optimistic. That's this number here. This number represents the total of all those non-tax property revenues, or non-property tax revenues, sorry. And then our restricted fund balance use, that's basically grant-funded positions. So those are baked in. They're not supported by taxes or by fees. So that makes up your total revenue number. I'm not talking to the solid waste number because it's self-funded, so we're just focusing on what affects you. So right now, as of yesterday, this is our current personnel number and our current OpEx number. So right now, as of Monday's meeting, you're down to 3.9. Of that, personnel's been cut to 1.9 from about 2.3. This is the B increase, pretty minimal considering the size of our budget. This is new programs, and keep in mind too, other than $8,000 for the search and rescue, the money sitting in here is onboarding expenses for the people that are up here.
And it's
So
small.
if people are reduced here, those onboard expenses proportionately decrease as well. This is the new capital, which we'll discuss on Friday. This is the adjustments to the wage study to bring it into line and make corrections. This is just a placeholder based on earlier direction. This is our current expense for health insurance per Alliant. That will be updated that last week in July when we get our final numbers. Word from Alliant says this could go down even more, which is great news. So that brings us to our proposed increases, and that's where your deficit comes from.
Okay,
So shall we dive into personnel?
yeah, let's do it.
Okay. So what I did yesterday is I sent you a whole flurry of little documents. So I'm just gonna bring those up and walk you through each one because I think it's easier to digest if we just take it in chunks. So we have some requests here in 2021 for on-call pay. These are the loaded totals for on-call pay. And as you can see, starting in 2019 is when we really started the on-call pay in earnest. As far as I know, and Sheriff, Prosecutor, please correct me, that I know the coroner's on-call pay is related to hourly employees. I believe the detectives and 911 are also hourly employees that have this on-call pay. And then I believe that the prosecutor, it's exempt employees that have that on-call pay. So that's your classifications for on-call pay, mainly hourly employees.
Okay,
So that said, any questions? I can just go to the next thing.
Well, I'll just reiterate that I'm against on-call pay for hourly because they should be paid time and a half for their time. And then the exempt, I'm still willing to consider just because of the nature of the prosecutor's business and having to, be on call and do the search warrants, go to the judge. And it's just a little bit, I think, more involved and more complicated. And that's just where I stand.
so what would that save us?
To cut these three?
About 45,000.
Yep, 45,575.
Okay. Cut. Take them out.
Bill? Okay. All right.
Tough year, tough.
At this point, and as I have said before, depending on what we find our revenues to be, and with unanimous consent of the board, that can always be revisited.
We're not done yet.
So let me ask you this, Dena,
Yes,
And I'm not putting you, I'm putting you on the spot, but really, I'm putting us on the spot because the decision's ultimately ours. If you go back to your first slide, where we had, yeah, the very first one in this segment.
The preliminary summary?
Yeah, thank you.
okay.
For me, it's difficult to be surgical. I don't want to be surgical, because then I get into a situation where I say, well, take this out, and somebody says, yeah, but. No, I don't want to hear near but, okay? Because now, anybody can make a case for any position, and at that point, why cut anything? So at some point, we just have to take the sweep that says out, take it out, okay? Make do, it's coming out. Because what we're dealing with this year is what I call optics. People have lost their jobs. No county employee has been laid off. Bear that in mind. We're going to make tough decisions. Some people aren't going to like it. You can grit your teeth at me. Have at it. But the fact of the matter is, we got to start taking some large chunks out of here. So when you look at, what was I looking at? Okay, new personnel.
So this upper half is new positions. The ones highlighted here, decisions were made on Monday to fund those for partially for the year. And let me pull up this.
If we just,
Positions.
if we
Okay,
made a,
let's do that.
I'm sorry?
Oh, she was just going to the right.
So this
Thank-
is where I broke it up into pieces. So this is the new position request. These are the ones right now that are funded for part of the year. So I
Okay.
just wanted to show that here's the estimated cost for 2021. So for 2022, by partially funding, and we know this happened with the wage study, so I wanted to give that context. That's how far you're behind by partially funding these, just as an FYI.
When you say behind.
So if you fund these positions for part of the year, the following year, you're going to have to pay for that position.
For the full
entire
year, right.
Right.
So, these are all the new positions that are left. And here is, and this is all loaded. So this is their estimated cost as they are in the budget right now with the timing noted here. This is the full year cost for those same positions.
Okay. So I have some suggestions. On the two ECOs being unfrozen, I still see that there's some empty, some open spots apart from the frozen ones. So I might suggest that we approve these but freeze them until they have a name associated with it. Does that make sense? So.
Freeze them for part of the year, or do you want, because if you freeze them, they're not gonna be in the budget.
Right, right. So, but if we freeze them for part of the year, let's say, December, but they have somebody on board before then, I'd like to be able to open that back up. So is there a way to do?
You would just have to fund it out of some other funding source.
Right.
So basically,
Tell someone to mute their.
mute your phones, please. Unless you're speaking.
So is this Captain Smart or is this Lieutenant Higgins, 911? Because I didn't hear, Lieutenant Crawford, you're not on, right? Are you on?
Captain Smart's here for those positions.
Okay, so you guys have people in background, you have open positions. So I guess my concern is to unfreeze positions when you still have open positions. That's a lot of money we don't need to tax for until you get bodies in there.
Commissioners, I don't want to overspeak for the Undersheriff on this or not, but I would be willing to have you say April 1, we unfreeze those and allow us to fill them at that time. With the positions that we have open right now, by the time we fill those and get those trained, April 1 would be an appropriate date to unfreeze those ones and fill those at that time.
Okay, so
Okay.
freeze them for 6 months.
Okay, so this one is already there, so I can do that other one.
Okay with that?
Yeah, I think you're right, though, to your point of going slowly. That's not gonna get it done.
Yeah, that's what I'm
We're gonna be
concerned
here till
about.
midnight.
Go ahead, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh,
You know,
That would
what-
just mean you're underfunded for the following year by another 55.
right.
okay, so let me sidestep for a moment. If, let's say, by the end of the day, Friday, when we tackle capital, we want to get to a point where we're balanced. How do I put this to you? We're treating personnel somewhat in a vacuum. We're treating it as an entity unto itself, which is fine, I get that. But as I look at this, I still have to keep an eye on capital. Because if I don't keep an eye on capital, I don't know how far to cut this so I get to zero by Friday.
Right, so I'm not looking at cutting this to get to a certain number, I'm looking at cutting it, what should we fund this year? That's kind of where I'm going.
Because capital's a one-time expense. You can use fund balance for capital. You can't use fund balance for this.
Well, yeah, but you
Well, you
should.
can, but it's dangerous.
But I won't, but I won't.
You know, I'm sorry, Leslie, go ahead.
Well, I mean, there's just a couple things to clean up here, and then we can move on. So the maintenance operator, the 61,000, that's actually only gonna be about 20,000 from general fund.
Right.
So is that reflected somewhere else, or it
Yeah,
just looks like 61?
Split 3 ways, so if we go back to the other.
Okay, if you've already accounted for that, that's fine, it just says
Yeah, it is.
61 right there, and so that's why I was
Yeah,
looking
so
at
see,
that.
it's those 3 funds, so it's split
Okay,
3 ways.
gotcha, okay.
Yeah.
I was hoping to shave some more off there somehow. I still don't think that we can do a deputy TCA this year. It just, you know, wanting to fund those bailiffs, and the bailiffs are the same issue about the open positions that I had with the ECO officers.
We do have an open bailiff position.
Right. So I don't know if we want to do that. But yeah, I'm fine with doing personnel again after we do capital, because there's just some things I don't think that
You mean
we
it
should
cap-
fund this year. After capital, after we take care of capital,
Okay.
yeah. So,
Yeah, come on.
I could not agree with you more, Commissioner Filios, about waiting until we do capital before we get into the bottom line with personnel. Because what I don't see up there, and you all know this is coming, is there's nothing up there about our matrix. There's not a patrol deputy, detention deputy, 911, there's none of the matrices up there. We have stated in the past, and we need to state it again, the fact that our number one priority is maintaining our wages. We're already behind. You hear it every year. It's the same conversation every year. I realize that the board is in a tough spot this year because of COVID. But before we start not putting the matrix up there, and before we start talking about cutting anything about wages, we don't even know what type of a spot we're in. You know, year after year, we, in my opinion, we go about this backwards. Maybe we ought to start talking about personnel first and talk about everything later. And we're sort of doing that now, but it's kind of mixed up. Again, you know, the matrix is critical to us for retention. I know you hear it every year. You know I'm going to fight like hell for it. And that's not to say that we're not willing to try to do our best on our end to try to make it up somewhere else, maybe in the capital area. I don't know what it's going to be yet, but I am not representing our folks right if I don't get that on the table right now. And so with that said, I would ask that it be considered that the matrix not be forgotten, with the understanding that on Friday when we get into capital, and Chris, to a conversation perhaps we've had before, we're not saying it's our way or the highway, you guys got all the money, but we are willing to compromise to keep the wages up.
Understood.
Fair enough?
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
so I might as well, you can sit down for this if you like.
No, maybe I want to stand up. Go ahead.
Maybe you want to say.
So here's where I'm coming from this year. If we're going to entertain matrix for sworn, we need to entertain it countywide, and that's $2 million. That's $1.9 million. We have 11% unemployment right now in the county. So what we had experienced in the past with not being able to get and retain employees has now changed.
By the way, second highest in the state
Yeah.
for unemployment. Go ahead.
Yeah, so we're covering the $400,000 for medical. We're not going to touch people's benefits this year. Private sector cannot compare. It's a $9 to $11 an hour average for per-C, for medical, for all that, our benefits on top of hourly wage. The state furloughed people. Kootenai County did not furlough anyone. Nobody lost a day's pay through this whole thing. We have people in the county who've lost their businesses, not going to get them back. We have people who are fighting to stay in their homes now and not even imagining a tax increase. I don't see how we can take a 0% and fund Matrix countywide. I don't see that. Plus, if we're talking optics, county employees are getting a raise when they didn't lose anything through this whole COVID situation where our citizens have. I can't entertain that. What I will entertain is holidays, a floating holiday, and either Christmas Eve or Thanksgiving off. So I would put those forward, that, employees for 2021. Additional. So, yeah, so 2 additional paid days off for 2021. It's difficult for me to entertain county employee wage increases when even the judges who were granted a 2%, judges statewide are not taking their 2% increase. They're staying where they're at. And I wish things were different. Trust me, we own a small business. I wish things were different. I wish that we were looking at, last year and saying, you know what, we can't afford these increases. We can't afford a COLA. I don't want our employees to go backwards. But right now, we have no idea where anything is going. So,
Well, Leslie, with that said, and what you just said is important, because we don't know where it's going. I haven't heard firm revenue numbers yet. I haven't heard the treasurer come in with firm numbers yet. And we go through this every year. It's not just because of COVID, but we have this same discussion every year about wages. And, if you want to talk about optics, you have a commitment to the public, which I completely understand. And by the way, I agree with what you say in terms of how people may view anything to do with taxes right now. I'm going to be retired probably next year, and it'll mean every bit as much to me then as it means to people now. However, the situation is the board also has a commitment to their employees, and you are predicating everything you're saying on a 0% tax increase, correct? So
Yep.
what part of that factors into the fact that your responsibility to the employees may come with a minor tax increase? 1% tax increase. We're not asking 3%. Who knows? It's too soon to say. But at this particular point, what I see is we're shutting the door on it before we got all the facts. In the meeting that we had on Monday, I think Commissioner Brooks spoke very well when he said, "Why are we doing all this when we don't even know how much money we got?"
well, because I don't know that we'll ever be able to know exactly how much money we have. And frankly, I don't think there's an appetite out there we were lucky. The county was lucky. We did not furlough anyone.
I agree with you completely, and we were all thankful for it.
Yeah, so I don't need to debate it. I've said my piece. That's where I believe. That's where I'm standing. And I definitely would like to move people through matrices next year, COLAs, all that kind of stuff. But this year, it's just we still don't know.
Well, I understand, and I think I've said all I need to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Dan.
Bill, do you want to jump in here?
Yeah, I want to pin myself down here. I'm very much in favor of 0% increase, and if we move a certain group through a matrix, we have to take care of everybody. We can't just be selective. That doesn't work. And right now, without the revenue numbers really being more solidified, okay, I don't think, honestly, that we can say, sure. I think we need to do that as much as we can, as much as humanly possible. And quite frankly, the optics be damned. We need to do what we need to do to operate the county in what I consider, and I've said this many times, a year of austerity. And if we find things open up a little bit more quicker than we thought, great. If they don't, okay, we all have to, it's a big sandwich and we all have to take a bite.
You done?
Yeah, for now.
You make some good points, Dan, as does Leslie. If we're going to take the 0%, excuse me, property tax relief that the state is offering, we're basically bound to the 49 million. And so my feeling is, and I think Leslie's made this point repeatedly, we haven't had to furlough anybody. Everybody's had their wage. Everybody kept their job. And you know, Dan, I fought hard last year for the implementation, and even going so far as to criticizing former boards for not putting their money where their mouth is. Or maybe they didn't mouth it, so they didn't have to put their money there. I don't know. But anyway, we implemented, and we would have continued the implementation this year, save for the COVID situation. If I'm going to run, if I'm going to fund the matrix for you, I'm going to fund something for everyone else. And if I can't do it for everyone, I'm not doing it for anyone. Now, to Bill's earlier point, if we discover as we get into the fiscal year that the revenues are greater than anticipated, I'm willing to revisit, and this is where I have to ask a question because I don't know if I've got the right answer. That would take reopening the budget, and it would take a unanimous vote. Dena, am I correct?
Yes.
Okay. And that much I'm willing to say. But to do it at this point, and, you know, you say the optics be damned, but but perception sometimes is everything. When we haven't furloughed and other people are hurting, as Leslie pointed out, to be giving out increases over and above a basic COLA is simply not justifiable. And so to the deputies who are listening, we put our best foot forward. We plan to continue it. Clearly, we have extenuating circumstances, and at this point in the budget cycle, I cannot support funding the matrix. I believe in it. I did it last year. I'd have done it again this year, but not under the present circumstances, unless they change, to Bill's point.
And all I want to say is that I certainly understand where you folks sit, but I don't want to shut the door on that, at least until we get to capital. We're approaching the COVID thing, I think, as a one-time, it happened, we're dealing with it, right? We don't know what's going to happen next year, correct? So in the context of the one-time thing, I'm asking the board to remember that our number one priority is that matrix and those wages, and if it has to come out of our end of things, then I ask that you'd be willing to let us deal with that on Friday when we look at capital. Don't shut the door on it, but if there's some capital things we're willing to give up in the context of a one-year thing, then I would ask the board to entertain that so we can maintain the matrix. And that's coming out of our hide, okay?
Are you going to take general pay plan employees out of your hide too?
I'm representing my employees, and there's a room full of electeds that can come right up here and do the same thing that I'm doing. But what I'm saying to you is I just need to know, I'm not going to just give it up when I think there's a chance to fight for it on Friday. And if you're telling me there's not, then I guess we're done. I already know where you're coming from, Leslie. But I just need to know, is it fair to shut the door right now when we still...
Well, the door doesn't get shut until, what is it, mid-July?
Yeah, we could always shut
There you
the
go.
door.
Well, would you entertain, when we look at capital stuff, if we can, we're talking $100,000, I can tell you right now what it is, it's $100,000. If we cut $100,000 one time out of our capital, would the board entertain funding the matrix?
No, I would take it out of last year's adopted budget. So not about this year's ask.
Okay, I'm just talking about this process we're in now. You're saying, we're saying to the board, we're $100,000 short to fund that matrix. And I'm saying to you, if we take it out of something in our budget that we requested
For fiscal '21,
for fiscal '21, would you entertain moving forward, or at least look at it?
I won't, because that's asking above what you had last year.
You can say no on Friday, but I just need to know that it's...
let me put it to you this way. I will always listen. But one of the considerations that I will make is, how do I take care of every other employee?
Well, and again,
I know where
I
you're coming
understand where
from,
you're
but I have to worry about everyone.
well, then
And according to my thing, it's 185,000. So,
I don't think that, the matrix has never been anywhere close to 185,000, just to fund the matrix. let me ask you this, though, and I've asked previous boards this. If I lose people, who are you going to call when your house gets burglarized? The assessor? Nope. You know,
I have a
you're not
question.
You're not going to call the treasurer's office, you're not going to call the assessor's office, you're still going to call the sheriff's office. But if I haven't got cops to respond because they're leaving to go to other agencies where they've got set pay plans, it doesn't do anybody any good. Public safety is the first and most responsible, or first use of government. And that's our job here. And I have to have retained, trained employees to do that. And I'll just
Yes, you
leave it at
do.
that. I'll just leave it at that. And that's why this matrix system was put into place in 2007 initially, and why it has been funded separately, because that is the primary function of government is public safety, and we have to retain good people. So I'll just leave it at that.
Okay. Well said. Bill, any thoughts?
Nope.
Leslie?
I'm good.
Okay. Dena?
All right, so something else to consider. So I did add these 2 lines here, one for the floating holidays, so it's up there to discuss. It's been mentioned, but it's there as a placeholder. Another placeholder here, when you were speaking about, we don't know what revenue is going to be. We'd have to reopen the budget next year if things come back. Another way to look at that is you could put a small bonus pool out there and fund that. It's a one-time expense. You could put that in as a placeholder. It's an option. It would be a one-time payout. It wouldn't be ongoing expense. So there's that to consider as we move down the path of getting balanced. If you wanted to put something in there for the employees, but you didn't feel that it was appropriate to fund steps, you still could put in a set amount that wouldn't be ongoing. So something to consider in the back of your mind going forward. So are there any other things in here that you would like us to remove and update? Leslie had mentioned the TCA. Is anybody else want to comment on the TCA?
Yeah, why do we need it? Can we
That's
cut
up
it?
to you.
Well, Carleen, and, I mean, it's like every need that is brought before us. I believe there's needs, I really do. I just don't have a path forward for every single need that's presented. For me, a priority is the court clerks. They haven't had anybody in 5 to 10 years added, but yet we've had added prosecutors, we've added public defenders, we've added judges. So to me, that has to take priority over the TCA position this year. But once again, to Bill's point, if we want to go through capital on Friday and then readdress these things, then.
And you know, there's still another approach. And I brought this up in past sessions with my former board members, but to no avail. And that is, I mentioned this earlier, it's difficult for me to look at a position and say, do we need this or don't we? Because I'm not as close to it as you are in your respective groups. I would rather go back to people and say, I want 5% out of there, you figure it out. Does that mean you're gonna hire for 5% less? I don't know. Does it mean you're gonna eliminate a position? I don't know. Take it out. I'm throwing out 5% arbitrarily. But the point that I'm getting at, it's just a lot easier. But that's where we have to know, and this is where we need your help, Dena, is to say, what do we want, how much do we need to reduce by? If it's $200,000 and that constitutes 7%, take it out, folks. 7% is coming out.
And the people on the ground, the people closest to the organization that's being, know best where it can come from.
Yeah, you figure it
It's not
out. I
me.
can't calculate that for you,
Not me.
We will be looking at B budget on Monday.
okay?
So that's operating budget. We did trim the operating budget pretty close last year, and we started with zero-based and travel, so the 2% that was added, a lot of that went back into training and those kinds of things. A lot of people have cut their B budget, but we will dig into those on Monday.
Yeah, there you go.
But just keep in mind, new positions in general are our biggest expense. And it's probably
Labor
a
always
flawed
is,
assumption on my part, but I wanted to bring those forward because these are the cost drivers for the county. we're a service business. People have to perform the service. So unfortunately, with limited resources, we have to decide which services we need the most people to execute them.
And I've gone to all my liaisons, and I've said, okay, you've asked for a new position, you know, we need to talk about this, we need to see why. And then I've even gone outside and figured out who those new bodies are going to touch, and I've talked to those people. And that's how I arrive at how I can say, okay, I see it's a need, but we just can't do it this year.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's like the Marine deputy, I mean, you know, that's probably gonna get cut, but I see the need now that new ordinance is there, where it's just going to be so much more of a problem not having bodies out there when we have so much more traffic on our waterways. So,
Commissioner Duncan, this is Carleen Behringer. I was wondering if I could just ask a question. I understand that, you know, the budget's really tight, and my office has not asked for an employee in a very long time. And I'm wondering, I know we talked about this the other day, but is it an option to possibly hire bailiffs and hire the deputy court administrator half into the new
That's
budget
an
year?
option.
6 months go by and then they're hired. Would that be something that the board would consider?
I think we
Why
talked
not?
about that with the bailiff already, right?
So
We
right now,
discussed it
both
with the
bailiffs
bailiff,
are-
but I'm curious about the deputy court administrator.
Jim, did you want to?
I know that if you reached out to the judges, they would all support this hire because they know how overwhelmed we are.
Jim, Brandon, Carleen, is there any chance that some of the other counties could help pay for this position? Because it seems wrong for Kootenai County to pay for all of it. Now, you said that person would be here 98% of the time. Well, but either the state or other counties, could they weigh in?
Jim, thanks for asking the question because I've thought about this a lot, and I think it would be better just to have the deputy court administrator work in Kootenai County and handle the Kootenai County load. When I talked about the 2%, I was talking about helping with organized district-wide trainings and helping with IICM and things like that. The more I thought about it the other day, I think the other counties can handle that themselves, and then I can be the lead on that if, in fact, we even do have district-wide trainings at this point. And for IICM, each county, each clerk's office kind of organizes that and sets things up. So I don't believe I would be using that deputy court administrator in any of the other counties at this point. But I'm happy to reach out if the board, I've already spoken to Commissioner Duncan. I'm happy to reach out to the other boards to see if they would contribute funding if that deputy court administrator actually did work in those counties. My main focus right now is Kootenai County because we're just inundated.
Well, again, back to Carleen's original proposal of funding 6 months only. It's a step in the right direction. So why don't we do that for now?
And maybe, you know, in terms of the administrative assistant for the court assistance officer, maybe if I rearrange some things in job descriptions, maybe I could have that person help Jay and Janet and Dan and Mark with their caseload. You know, maybe that person could be the Kootenai County designated administrative assistant to answer all the telephones strictly for Kootenai County.
Okay.
So that's something else I've been thinking about. I don't know how many hours I could dedicate to that, but I could certainly try.
Every step in reduction is a step in the right direction. We appreciate it, Carleen.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Okay, where to?
So we will be looking at the on-call, that'll be a reduction. There's a document overtime, and I sent that to you, and I think this was more of an apples-to-apples comparison because was our conversation on Monday. We were talking about three-year averages. So in our personnel summary, we have it just the loaded rate, the loaded amount, full amount for budgetary impact. This schedule looks at the unloaded rates so we can see apples to apples increases over the year. So if you compare all of these asks for overtime this year, compared to the three-year average, we're only seeing an $11,000 increase. So the departments have looked at their operations and they've plugged in overtime based on what they're using. So.
That's not unreasonable.
Right, so to not be arbitrary with overtime cuts, I wanted to give you some more color around this, to just show that these are in line. And this one in particular, this one looks a little higher, but it's basically just restoring it to what last year was, because district court is inundated, and about November, they're really gonna get inundated, because everything's gonna open back up again. So we wanted to make sure we at least restored them to last year's levels.
Got it.
So if we were to say yes to the overtime requests and then freeze open positions, and then when they got a name for that open position, we could unfreeze it and then make the agreement that, okay, overtime will now go down because of the new position that came on.
And that's a valid point. Because when that occurs, or as that occurs, we will also, now this takes us to Bill's point, have a better handle on the revenue that's come in. Because clearly that's going to occur at some point later, if I can say that, in the fiscal year. So we know what we're dealing with for revenue, which is the unknown currently.
Right. Well, and keep in mind too, you have less than 4 million to balance. It's really not that much. When you consider it's, you know, $101, $102 million budget, it's not a whole lot. You're almost there.
Why does it seem so hard though?
It's hard because your decisions involve people. And people aren't numbers. And, you know, we perform a service and we're serving the county, and that's not something you can easily attribute to a graph or a number.
So what did we take out? What did we decrement today?
So we took out a little bit in personnel. I wanted to revisit these open positions, and I did send you some detail of the open positions.
Yes.
I put these numbers back in where we were taking a mixture of maybe 100% frozen over 200 days, 50% at 100 to 199 days, and then maybe just freezing until January for the ones that were just under 100. We also have ones that are 0 to 90. I don't know if you want to do a full-on hiring freeze. There's, if you were to freeze until the first of the year, that would save another 338. And this is just high level. There could be some of these positions in the process of being
You know, if you're
hired.
freezing till the beginning of the year, for goodness sakes, you're only freezing them for 3 months.
Right, I'm just saying, just for context. So here's some other options too. So we looked at restricted fund balance, and there are two particular departments that have a large restricted fund balance. Now, in the past, we've used county assistance fund balance to fund their operations and take a 0% levy rate on that fund. We did
Okay.
that last year, we did it the year before. The clerk was generous enough to allow that to happen. If that happened for 2021, you could subtract that much out of your deficit. The airport is sitting on a very large fund balance right now.
Go ahead.
And the airport also has a large capital ask. That's also covered. If we were to cover their entire levy need for the airport for just 1 year, they would still have just over $100,000 in their fund balance. I've been assured by our grants accountant that that's ample for any grant matches that they would need.
Okay, so now when you,
You could potentially take another $500,000 out by funding the airport's operations for 1 year with their restricted.
okay, now for everyone's benefit, including my own, this is not part of our $18 million fund balance. This is discrete, this is different, this
These
is
are
restricted. All right, go ahead.
funds where we normally pay for their capital out of restricted funds, but in the case of county assistance, we have been dipping in and reducing that fund balance because those restricted fund balance, when they start creeping up, we tend to want to draw those down. We don't want to carry huge fund balances in there because we can relieve the burden of the tax levy in those areas when they start building up large.
Well, and in essence, that's exactly what we did with APD, right? A couple of years ago?
APD
Yes,
has
it
been
seems like
self-funding for
peanuts, but
quite
it was
some
the same
time.
principle, right?
Yeah.
So yes, Chris, yeah, it was 3.4 in our fund balance for indigent 2 years ago. And to save taxpayer money, it's sitting there, that's what it's supposed to be used for. So those two right there give you $1.3 million.
So what do you suggest we take out, Dena?
Well, what this shows is what the total levy would be for the airport. If you fund that with fund balance, then the airport levy would be zero. And you could reduce this from your deficit. Same thing with Fund 40 indigent. If you fund all the indigent operations with their restricted fund balance, you could take that out. So let's go back to our.
Do you want to take it all out, or do you want to leave 100 grand?
Those are big numbers, and I would take them
That's
all.
$1.3 million right there.
Those are
Right,
big
but
numbers.
All right.
That
Jim,
still leaves the airport 103,000 of fund balance for grant matches.
They're healthy.
That still leaves
They're healthy.
$2.2 million for indigent
Right.
in their fund balance, if
Yeah.
we do those two.
Let's do it. Leslie, you okay?
I think so. So Jim, are you all right with county assistance coming out
Sure,
again?
Because we don't know, again, with Medicaid expansion, we have no idea. We got
Right.
county
Big
assistance.
numbers.
Yeah, I know, you're right.
We
Yeah.
got 2.2 million. I think that's good for the taxpayers, especially as austere as we've got to be
Yeah.
Sure.
this year.
Let's do it.
Okay, so if we use these two, and we freeze the positions just at a high level, and we can look at those in more detail and make sure we're not pulling anything we shouldn't be. This is just looking at positions that are 92 to over 200 days. If we're to freeze those positions.
For 3
at these
months?
different levels, okay, if we did that, and we funded with fund balance for these two, there's your deficit.
Oh, my goodness.
Yeah.
Meeting over. We'll balance it on Friday.
Because you have, just take a gander at this. It's gonna be less than that because you've already cut some other stuff. Your total capital asks are 3.2, and you only have to balance 1.3. So you can fund part of your capital with ongoing funds.
We can do
Which means if you wanted to fund something with fund balance for a one-time purchase, that means you can look at your personnel again, which means that we can start working with that and see what we have left. So we can plug in these changes, I'll send
Please.
them off to you, and Friday we can look at capital. Then Monday, we're gonna look at operating. Again, we've, Michelle has looked at the B budget and looked at some particular areas where there could be some cuts based on CPI. But right now, I mean, if you look at what our increase is for B, it's pretty small potatoes. Capital is gonna be your big win. So, if we're good, then we will go back and we will crunch the numbers and get you some new balances.
Okay. Yes, Jim?
Yeah, it's one of your departments. Is somebody gonna reach out to Stephen and make sure he was on board with that?
Sure.
Bill took it. Before we, Nancy, do you have any thoughts?
I would be careful saying for personnel expenses to move money from overtime over to personnel because we have to pay overtime anyway. So we can say we're reducing your budget, but if they go over, we still have to pay it.
But my hope is that the need for overtime goes down when that
diminished.
body is functioning.
No, I get it.
Yeah.
I would share that for district court, approximately 60% of that 50,000, so around 30,000 of it is mostly clerks staying in court late for cases that go over and helping the public coming to the counters at the last minute for protection and stuff.
Right.
And those are very, time
Consuming.
Right, but you guys don't have a lot of open positions. So that's kind of like a separate issue. If you guys are full and you need overtime, that's different than having to have overtime because you don't have those positions. So that's kind of the distinction, but thank you for bringing that up. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Dena, the question to you, can you clarify what you're talking about with frozen positions one more time, or what do you mean? I'm not clear on that.
Okay, so I sent off a document. I have it here. I can pull it up. It's pretty ugly, but maybe it's easier to. Okay. So what I did was I took all of the open positions and I stratified them by number of days open. So this first grouping is anything over 200 days open. Now granted, I'm gonna reach out, when I do my calculations, I'm gonna reach out to the departments and say, okay, are any of these gonna be hired out? Because then I need to take them out of the group. But just for starters, I said, okay, estimated loaded amount for everything over 200 days. If we freeze it for the full year, that's what we save. 3/4 of, if we open it in January, April, July. Then we come down to basically 100 to 199. Same deal. Full year, January, April, July. And then there's this little sliver in here where they're over 90, where they'll probably be 100 in no time, so I just included those. And then everything else below, I ignored. Because these are likely in process. Now granted, that's a big piece.
Yeah, but if they're in
You could do a
process.
full hiring freeze until January, like we were talking about, and not hire anyone, but how realistic is that? If you were to do a full-on hiring freeze, you could maybe squeeze that out, but again, you're gonna be behind. Whatever you cut for part of the year, you're not gonna be funded for the next year, so it's just stuff to consider.
Well,
Open positions are, tend to be more preferable than furloughs, and that's why we look at them.
understood.
Okay.
Yes.
Question, does it matter that we're in the process of hiring, like we're
Yes, then we would want to.
That
put
matters.
person
Yeah, that
on
does,
the
yeah.
list.
Yep, absolutely.
So, with your okay, I'll send this off to the group so
Yeah,
that they can
please.
identify who's in the process of being hired, so we don't freeze somebody who's gonna be hired.
Okay,
Great.
public comment. 2:37, meeting adjourned. Thank you. Oh, I'm sorry, Barry? Sorry about that.
Commissioners, this is unrelated, but I was listening to the governor
Oh, please,
whatever
yes.
thing, and that he was talking about, and he cited something that I thought was worth mentioning, and I'm sure Ben can confirm this, but the governor said, if I heard him right, that Idaho is one of the few states where no incarcerated individuals have contracted the COVID virus. Is that, Ben, is that accurate? I thought that was a pretty amazing statistic for our state. worth
Didn't we have
mentioning.
one?
Though, to be clear, we have 2 people currently in custody who tested positive prior to coming to the jail. They're still within that window of time, but they're in a medical isolation unit, and we have no spread in the jail.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, we have
but
no
those,
spread.
those came in
No
last
spread,
week.
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And
Very telling. Thank you, Barry.
Has nobody.
I'm sorry, Ben?
The State Department of Corrections has no active COVID cases in the Department of Corrections.
Wonderful.
good.
Good job. Yeah, we do keep clean jails. Okay, thank you, everyone, again. Appreciate it. 2:38, meeting adjourned.